If you look around the world, you find that the world recognizes innovation, technology, and the world possibly recognizes greed. So Milton Friedman was right. Those who create great value, those who think are a threat to the market, Alphabet, which is a digital monopoly with disproportionate voting rights, who promise the world they will do no evil, seems to be part of the big evil empire which want to control the mind of all the citizens in the world. Now, if we see that background globally, would you say that Milton Friedman was right when he said profits are the first prerogative? Governance is important, but is there a governance premium? Is there a myth or reality? What is your view, Vikram?
You know, one of the privileges of being or sharing a board with Mr. Damodaran is that I always find his interventions to be thought-provoking and insightful. And when I was asked to join this panel, looked at the topic, I said, this is an example of Mr. Damodaran's, intellectual heft. He's forced me to think about an issue that in binary terms, but in fact which does not lend itself to binary issues. I, for one, don't think that governance premium is a fiction or a myth. There is enough evidence to establish that reputation matters. I mean, there was a study done by the Reputation Insight in 2018, which established that 38% of the market capitalization of the FTSE 100 companies is derived on account of reputation. We know that institutional investors will pay a premium to acquire the stock of companies that are better governed. This is because they expect a better return on the stocks. We know that suppliers will give better credit terms. We know that credit rating agents will rank a company higher, and that, of course, will improve the cost of capital and improve your working capital management. On the flip side, two examples establish also the same point, which are Aramco has just pulled, Aramco is a Saudi Arabian exploration company, Aramco has just pulled its IPO from the Western world. Why? Because the bankers said that it will not be able to secure a $2 trillion valuation. And one of the reasons, there were several reasons that the bankers gave, but one of the reasons that the bankers gave was the opacity, the lack of transparency in governance. And so today, the Crown Prince of, not today, but a few days back, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia decided that instead of listing this company, or rather than doing a roadshow around the Western world, he will just focus on securing or limiting the IPO to the Gulf countries and domestic investors. I mean, another example, from your previous company. One whistleblower issues a letter, and the company, Infosys, loses 53,000 crore rupees in one session. So, governance premium is not a myth. The real issue for me, and I'd like to be able to talk about it, but I won't in the course of conversation. The real issue for me is how do you reconcile the divergent, clashing, competing interests of the players that impact corporate governance. The management, they have a short-term interest. They're driven by quarter-to-quarter performance. Understandably, perhaps, their bonuses are dependent on that. The board of directors, who have a fiduciary interest, who want the government or the companies to look beyond the narrow purpose of shareholder primacy. The regulator that codifies the laws and insists that companies follow that prescription. And then the government that, as Mr. Damodaran, I think, and Mr. Birla said earlier today, see business as an integral part of their social and political and economic development. So how do you reconcile the conflicting interests of these four players? And I think that's why this topic, Mr. Damodaran, is very, very interesting. Because I would actually reframe it and say that it's governance premium reconciling the conundrum. That's how I would want to focus on this.
If there's no growth in a company, the profits are very low because you're a very good company, you do good to society, but you do no good to your shareholders, maybe a little bit of bias. I mean, there are a lot of factors which give a premium to a company. I mean, if the company, Enron was a very good citizen in Houston, it did very well, it had a very high PE, till somebody blew the whistle and something went wrong, right? And they found it's totally a pack of cards, right? So this issue, I agree with you that governance is important in the long run because investment is an act of faith. But the premium issue of governance, is it also linked to growth, to profitability, innovation? What is your view, Arijit?
Yes, I would entirely agree with that. Corporate governance cannot be disassociated with the business model. First and foremost, a company to succeed has to have a good business model, which will evolve and change as the situations change. And today, the situations are changing very fast because of technology and so many other things that are coming up. Obviously, a company which has a good business model, and once it grows, it needs to put in place certain governance structures which are attuned to ensuring that those objectives get realized. But to say that purely corporate governance, you can have the best directors and you are having a business model which you are not changing, and we can have umpteen examples of companies which have, I would suggest, would have wonderful directors, but globally and in India, but slowly have faded away. So in the, they say among the Fortune 500 companies, only 14%, I believe, survive more than 7 years. And if we were to look at those companies, many of them may not have had good corporate governance, but I'm quite sure that some of them would have. So I think that's the fundamental question. But corporate governance, to my mind, this topic which has been set up, is whether it is important and relevant. And I would 100% agree with Vikram that this is indeed very relevant. Corporate governance, especially when organizations grow. Today we have startups, we start with just 1 or 2 members and then grow into a unicorn. And then as soon as that happens, once they become a Facebook or something of that kind, they need to place those governance structures in place, which to my mind, again, is not just the board of directors. You can have any number of rules as 50%. One thing that I wanted to, 2 things I would like to add is that on corporate governance, when there are questions which are easy, that is whether you are doing the right thing in doing a related party transaction, either it is wrong or it is right, and the board and the members must come out. But most of the time, or many a time, the decisions which are coming into question are those which I think there's a very famous Harvard professor who has written on this, Joseph Badaracco, who talks of managing in the gray. That is, typically those questions which come up are the ones where there are no clear-cut answers. And that is where corporate governance comes in, and possibly how the entire ecosystem relates to that would take this forward. The other one, I think, relates to when we talk of corporate governance, it is as if some of the board members need to be adversarial to the strategy of the company. You know, many a time the reading that you have in the media and things like that, independent directors are not playing their role because they have not necessarily highlighted something wrong. Yes, when something is palpably wrong or the direction that the company is taking is not right, they need to come forward. But I think the first success or the first thing that a director, whether he is a whole-time director or an independent director, and corporate governance among all stakeholders, as he mentioned, everyone should have the interest of the company at heart. If that be the case, I think many of the issues that come up would get resolved, and the entire thing revolves around corporate governance. So to sum up, I would say that corporate governance, whether it is important, 100%. But whether we can really measure as to how much is because of corporate governance and otherwise, and whether it can be sort of de-linked from the core business model of the company, that we have to see.
Now, Vikram, let me put it in a different manner. The value of a company is the business model that it has, the growth rates, the profitability, its longevity, sustainability, because the business model and ability to compete, and the risk in the business. Now, would you say that when you evaluate every corporation, there's a certain amount of risk. The risk gets reduced by good corporate governance practice, and to that extent, because there's a lower risk, there's a premium for good governance. I mean, would you say that the risk in the business gets reduced? Because if there's no business model, if there's no profits, if there's no innovation, then the value will be very less, despite having the best board in the world, setting standards everywhere. Investors will see it differently because investors want money. So would you put it in this way, that the risk comes down when you have good governance with proper checks and balances?
Yeah, I mean, I could put it that way, or I could make the same point differently. I could say that there is no trade-off between profits and corporate governance. If a company that does not make profits cannot afford corporate governance. But a company that is incapable of good governance does not deserve profits.
Does not?
Deserve profits. So that's my trade-off. There is no, that's what my point, that if you're a company that actually does not now recognize your role as part of the larger community of which you're a part, if you do not recognize that you have not just to look at the narrow interest of your shareholders, if you feel that it's all to do with business, Milton Friedman's sort of,
ethically,
statement,
and as per
the
the
business
law.
of business is business.
But ethically and as per the law.
Huh?
Ethically and as per the law. You don't break the law to make money.
You don't break the law. No. The point is that you are working within the law. You're ticking the box, however. It's a rhetorical flourish towards good corporate governance, but you don't actually have the conviction. That's what I was trying to say in my opening remark, was that if you have a management that feels that its only objective is profits, maximization of profits, if its only objection is to meet the demands of their shareholder, then I believe that in today's world, it may not have been applicable some years back, but in today's world and looking forward, that company, that management will lose its license to operate. I believe that there are now other forces that have to be taken into account by the company. The business model is absolutely imperative. There's no way that you can make profits unless you have a business model that is able to counter the competitive forces in today's world. This goes without saying. But all I'm trying to say is you have to look beyond the narrow purpose of the shareholder, of the primacy of the shareholder. And that's why I say there is no trade-off. You will not make profits in the long term. You will be able to generate long-term shareholder value if your company is built on the pillar of operational excellence, societal responsibility, and transparent good governance.
All right, Arijit, let me take a very particular example. You have a great bank, 200 years history, which always believes in the social good, believes in the good of community for 200 years, which is owned by the government, which believes in social good, of course, and always charges low rates to everybody, helps industrialize this country by taking slightly greater risk, and is ethical and standard, but does not get good value. And then you have another bank which focuses on narrow segment, earns 4.5% 5% spread, grows at 20-30%, and is the epitome of the marketplace and has got great value. Now, where's the governance premium? Now, I'm just telling you, your business model, both have got great business model, liability franchise and everything else, but look at the way people here evaluate business. Now, we can have this myth creation that corporate governance is important, you got to do this, you got to have great people on the board, they got to think of good of society, but market doesn't believe like that. Investors don't believe like that. So how do you, this dichotomy, how do you explain this dichotomy?
I think this question was expected.
No, I'm asking
But
this
I
question
have
to bring out a very
absolutely.
stark comparison.
Absolutely.
I'm looking at reality to give a very stark comparison. It's got nothing to do with anybody.
Absolutely. So to my mind, there is no dichotomy. The reason why State Bank of India or some of the other banks exist is because of a certain stage in which India's development is placed. And that was true when State Bank was created in 1955. And I would think completely that thing has not gone away even in 2019. Within SBI, we have very clear clarity on what we are required to do and what we have set out to do. We may have done things which have sometimes gone wrong. So let me try and summarize what those 2-3 principles are. First, we are a commercial organization. So therefore, your question about what should be the market cap and how we compare is very valid. But having said that, we are a commercial organization with a difference, in the sense that our commitment to society, which probably a private organization can debate, that how much I would be wedded to shareholder value and how much I need to be wedded to the core development and societal objectives, that is not a cause for debate for us at all. We have to start with the premise that there are certain objectives of government, of the government of the day, and for the society at large, which we cannot do away with. Say, for example, for us, priority sector should not be a question of achieving 40%. For us, it should be a matter of faith that we go out and reach, and we should attune or have tried to attune our business model in such a way that even that business becomes profitable. Agriculture, the small and marginal farmers. So I think what is happening in the market is, market realizes that State Bank is wedded to that. They also realize that this commitment to the poor and all that has a beneficial impact on the bank as well, our low-cost deposits and all that. But having said that, market has a view on government ownership. And that is a more complex question. It will be a very, very long-winded thing if I were to go into details of that. But to my mind, I think that relationship is also very healthy. Where is also reasonably healthy. I won't say very healthy, but how healthy it is, but it is reasonably healthy.
Okay.
There has to be, government has ownership. How much they will control and how much they will not control has been a cause of debate, but at least for State Bank, it has been reasonably healthy. But at the same time, I think what the market also looks at when they look at State Bank is also how we are doing in the commercial organization bit, which, as I said, is our first thing. Whenever we have done well on the commercial organization part, I think to that extent, the value that has been given to State Bank has been, I can take umpteen examples. As soon as one judgment was disclosed 2 days back, immediately our share price went up because they realized that the way we have gone about resolving that asset is finally going to bear fruit. But over a reasonably medium period, I think what State Bank needs to do is we have to be very careful about the commercial part of our business calls that we take. And while there have been ecosystem problems in the country, we would be foolish to state that in the last 10 years, we have not made mistakes in the business calls itself that we have taken, where there was no compulsion for society and so on and so forth. So I think, yes, the answer to your question will be that we would think that definitely the kind of difference that we have perhaps with the largest market cap ranked private sector bank and ours is not justified. That is one view. But to the extent that this comes from a view that the market has on government ownership, I think we have to live with it because that is the reason why we exist. And we have no issues at all about doing it. We feel proud about it. We have done huge amount of things for this nation. It is just not on social welfare. It is about the infrastructure that we have built. And if our market cap is slightly lower because of that, we do not mind that. I won't say we do not care about that, but we do not mind that. We are absolutely fine with that, and we would continue to do what we are doing. But on the commercial part, we in the bank feel that there is scope to improve. And in that, let me assure this audience that we have a very, very strong board ourselves. And the corporate governance principles that have been built into our organization, which you would be aware because you are part of our advisory committee and various other things, not directly in the board. and the kind of discussions and debates that we have, and many a strategic decision that the bank has been taking in the last few years has changed because of the guidance we have got from the board. So I would broadly classify it like this. We are fine. We have to be very careful about the fact that as a commercial organization, we are mindful of what the market says, and we need to respond correctly. But whether we can do away, not only do we want to not do away with our social commitments, we would like to make sure that we do it in a manner which is good.
Now, a premium or a discount is what is given by investors in society. Now, society considers the bank to be India. It is India. Everybody admires the bank. Now, the investors who put a little bit of money hope to earn good returns. Now, they have a different profile. Now, when you talk about good governance and everything else, this is stark. Now, Vikram, government ownership in business globally is not looked at effectively, even though government objective is good of society, all stakeholders. What these 200 businessmen in America spoke about, stakeholders and doing social good, government does that. As a government, you elect it and all that. Second question is, in India, MNCs have a premium. Now, is it because people believe MNCs have a better governance mechanism? Because all the MNCs in India are controlled by an MNC somewhere else. Many of them are forced to list, and there is things happening outside. And even if something happens outside, the Indian company is always looked at as an exemplar. Now, when you look at these two issues, government ownership, MNC premium in India, where is this governance premium or deficit?
But well, we kind of already addressed it. The issue is investors' perception of governance as much as the reality of governance. And let's assume for a moment, like in State Bank of India, there's no question that State Bank of India is a very well-governed, government-owned entity. Okay?
Yeah.
It's quite possible, on the other hand, that someone sitting in Oklahoma that doesn't understand the nature of our society, might worry that, that State Bank of India's governance procedures are not transparent because Government of India is the majority shareholder. It's a perception. And on the other hand, the private sector, the other bank that you were talking about, they may actually consider that it is a much more, effective, transparent.
It too has good governance.
Yeah. So I'm just saying that, look, we can try our best to try and understand what defines investor premium, or what determines the premium that investors will pay. What I think we should be, sort of settle on is that good governance does attract a premium. And if a government-owned company wants to secure the same premium as a multinational or a private-run company, then it must make an effort to bridge the gap between perception and reality. And it's a matter then of communication. Yeah. But I am not for one...
You stick to your principle that governance does have a premium.
I have... That's why I said that this topic made me think, and I go back to what I said. The issue really for me, and I'm on a few boards and I've been in company, is how do you realize that premium?
That's a good point.
One point is just what I said, communication. But there are multiple stakeholders impacting the government, the governance of a company. These four that I mentioned are just four. But there are employees as well. There are vendors. There's the international community. How do you actually ensure that they come together, collaborate, rather than compete, in order to realize that premium? It's a very narrow corridor within which you can collaborate. You're squeezed on all ends, okay, at all ends, and there is a corridor. And I say it's a corridor because it's a journey. The process of securing long-term capital, value from good governance is a long journey. It's not a one-off. And it requires these multiple stakeholders to find a way of staying within this narrow corridor. And this narrow corridor where they collaborate, where they search for means by which they will actually add value. So if I'm an independent director of a company, I must know what my objectives are, and I must stay within those bounds. I can't look to enhance my powers. If I'm a manager, I must make sure that I don't operate that company like an autocrat, that it doesn't become my personal fiefdom. Okay? If I'm the government, I must realize that business model matters, that the companies that don't make profits are not going to be able to subserve society. And if I am a regulator, I have got to start ensuring that there's got to be predictability, consistency, and not an intrusiveness that exists today.
Vikram, I look at Apple. Steve Jobs ran it like a one-man show. He decided most important things. Rest were decided by management and the rest of the people. He did very well. He created the most valuable company in the world. Where is good governance? Where is the board? You don't hear of anybody on the board. You see these big tech companies, okay? And you see Exxon, study and doing the routine matter, a good, decent company. So for me, if you say that good governance reduces the risk in the business, and therefore the lower risk leads to a premium, is logically able to understand. Now we say good governance by itself creates a premium. Mathematically, or in trying to understand value, it creates a sense of confusion in the mind. Think about it, I'll come back to you. Now Arijit, there's a very important thing that happened which Mr. Damodaran spoke about, which I think is very important. Stakeholders have expanded in society. Now the government's role in every society is shrinking, and the role of the corporate sector is becoming bigger because they have a bigger impact on the lives of people. Now we have civil society, which has suddenly become very powerful, going after business to force them to behave in a manner they want, supposedly for the good of society, right? Because why? The corporates have become very, very large. Now they're forcing big investors not to invest in certain class of companies because of climate change, because of labor practices, etc. And the sovereign funds and the big funds say we will not invest A, B, C, D. One natural resource company in this country had a similar problem. Now, do you see this kind of a movement in society becoming bigger, which will force business to follow this broad path or the narrow path, like you said, and therefore give a premium because you have this big investor saying, hey, I only want this, I'm not going to go there?
Absolutely. I think there is no doubt about that. And the finest example I would take is that you have two venerable media outlets in the world, which all of us respect. One is The Economist and one is the Financial Times. I think 1 month back, the Financial Times officially, I've never seen any newspaper do it, officially has declared that the capitalism that they would like to subscribe and promote has to change. And that basically takes into account all the things that you have been talking about, that it has to be, it's just not Thomas Piketty anymore. It is that the world itself has to, the nature of capitalism itself has to change. And when we now talk of shareholder, I don't think any company or any board can think of shareholder in the narrow sense of only the investors in the company. It has to be all the stakeholders. And it would include everything, the global way in which environmental concerns have come in, social responsibilities in poor countries, which, earlier it was only government-owned banks or State Bank of India taking care of CSR. That is no longer, it has to be done. I think in the previous panel I was listening, 1% or 2%. It's not a question of numbers, as I think Mr. Damodaran said. It is a question of you have to have that will to be part of society. So those things are a given. Civil society will naturally intervene whenever things are not going in the right direction, and it will apply to all of us. And how it will shape up, I think, is a slightly more difficult question, because politically the way things are moving in certain parts of the world, that seems to be at slightly contrarian trends to the way people are coming forward. So that is one. The other one I would like to take from the previous question, partly on government relationship and corporate governance. So again, why I said that we have a healthy relationship, One example I can take is the subsidiaries of State Bank of India. If you see all the 6 or 7 that we have set up over the period, they rank at par or sometimes are ranked better than the subsidiaries set up by the private sector banks, whether it is a mutual fund, whether it is general insurance, which was life insurance, investment banking also, barring some ups and downs that we've had. And the reason why that happens is, so State Bank again is a semi-government. We own more than, and as a matter of policy, we have declared that we will not come down below 51%. And yet the market does not seem to give lesser value to those subsidiaries merely because there is a government or implied government ownership. So the point that I'm trying to make is that while we feel that overall State Bank has a value discount which is not really justified, I think we are also very, very careful and circumspect about what the market is saying. Because in the medium and long run, the market has a point that it wants to make, that you need to, when you have an ownership model, you need to develop a very healthy relationship between what you do as an owner and what you do as a kind of ensuring that the owner's interests, that is the reputational interests and all, are taken care of. I think probably why the subsidiaries get a very good reputation in the market and market cap is because they are doing well. Of course, without a business model and not doing well, they would not succeed. But also because State Bank has somehow managed to get this ownership, how much control I should have over the subsidiaries, broadly right. And as much as the government is able to demonstrate, as you were saying, that sometimes communication, somehow there is this feeling among investors that the government has necessarily overreached in the case of any institution, which may not be true. And I can say for sure that that is not always true. But somehow the market doesn't seem to believe that. That is the reason.
Well, the market is the wisdom of the people. I'm sure you'll agree with that. Now, here is this big question, which now comes up. You have this civil activists, you have the sovereign fund, the big institute saying, hey, this is our view of the world. We want to do well, blah, blah, blah. They may generate lesser returns. And they're suffering, the people who suffer are broad society. So I feel happy I'm doing my bit for society, but I'm getting lesser returns. When my pension comes, the check will be smaller. Maybe I eat 1 roti less. Now, that gives an opportunity for innovators to come and destroy you faster using technology. Right? Now, when innovators come, nobody talks about governance. They talk about innovation. They talk about growth. They talk about value creation, blah, blah, blah. This governance is only for mature, steady, good people who wear suit and boots and wear a tie and have tea and coffee and talk nice things like you do, Vikram. Maybe.
I knew you were going to moderate, so I can balance it out.
I was contemplating whether to wear the tie or not.
I'm with the mass of people. I'm an ordinary Joe, But Vikram, this confusion in the mind, so I think, we're all getting more and more confused about the objective of business and objective of governance. We agree. If you say governance reduce risk, therefore higher premium, as an analyst, yes, easy to understand. Governance is always good, will always have a premium, then we have to put many, many caveats. Now, when you see this society coming and saying stakeholders, governance, and people sit on the board and say, hey, we got to be good to people, but using shareholders' money. That poor guy has put money to get his dividend and higher value using his money, his or her money. Now, how do you reconcile all this? You sitting on the board, wanting the social good.
I've got to get back this question to you because I'm very interested in why you are making such a distinction between the reduction of risk and the confirmation of a premium. I could argue that the very fact that the risk reduces because of good governance.
That is a given. We are not disagreeing.
Yes, but that's a premium. It's an opportunity value gain.
Yes, that's a premium. Yeah, understandable.
Yeah, but understandable. But okay, so you're making the point that it's difficult to understand how you calculate the premium. If that Vikram is saying there's a premium. Now, Vikram can't actually tell me what is the premium, and I'll concede that. I'll concede that I can't, okay? But I will also say to you that in order for business to secure that premium, they cannot just regard society as a distraction. They cannot regard society as as outside their frame of
They
reference.
can't be the East India Company anymore.
It cannot be. You know, I am just listening to you, and maybe this is not quite relevant. I think it is, but let me. There is an epic called the Gilgamesh epic.
Yes.
You have heard of it?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so he's a very learned man. Gilgamesh was the king of a Sumerian kingdom called Uruk, 4,200 years ago. He was a visionary, and he had established a remarkable city called Uruk, which today is actually just a dried up channel in the Euphrates in Iraq. But he was a tyrant. He treated everyone as slaves. He trampled on the rights of his citizens like a wild bull, and people despaired. So the people then finally, appealed to their god, the Sumerian god Anu. She was the leader of the pantheon of gods. And Anu responded and sent to earth someone who was Gilgamesh's equal in every respect. His strength, his power, his authority, his intellect, in every respect. And the purpose of sending him down was to check Gilgamesh's authority, Gilgamesh's despotism. And eventually, Gilgamesh and this double called Enkidu actually collaborated. And that's what brought peace to Uruk. So my point to you is that in the end, if business wants to secure its premium, it has to find a way of collaborating with the other stakeholders. And the other stakeholders, and that means directors or society or government or regulators, they also have to be clear that their power is such that they can check and balance the tendency of managers to think that they have all the answers. The temptation of managers to keep control, they have to also, so you need strong independent directors who are able to counter, but not so strong as that they tread on the turf of the manager.
The superstar CEOs have created great value, and everybody plays along.
That's where you're saying, but there are enough examples of superstar CEOs destroying companies.
Yes.
I mean, Enron was destroyed by a superstar CEO.
Yes.
Zuckerberg's market cap has absolutely collapsed because of superstar CEO.
Well, it's gone up again.
It's gone up again. But we know enough examples of superstars. In my own previous business, I can give you 3 or 4 examples of companies that had a market cap of over $150 billion that are struggling. Now, it's not because the company's processes were all, they were there, but it was tick in the box process.
Okay, now let's come to this important question, which I think, how do you realize this value? Let us assume there is a governance premium. We differ. I think it is reduce the risk, therefore premium goes up, because if the premium is 5%, the risk is 1%, you get 4%, others don't get it. Mathematically, it looks good.
I concede that.
You agree
4%
with that?
premium rather than 5. I am not going to debate that.
Okay, so we can agree to that. But how do you realize this? How do you realize? What are the things to do to realize this? You have a superstar board. I mean, you have Mr. Damodaran on the board. Is Damodaran coming there give you that 4%? And yes, there's a CEO who talks to Mr. Damodaran and says, sir, can I do this or not? He gets his blessing, does everything else. Now, what do you do to realize the value? Is communication important? Is constant interaction important? Is creating the faith important? Now, you look at a company whose value just fell. It's a good company. It's a great company. It set standards. But it fell so fast for a very frivolous whistleblower. I mean, I looked at that. I find it frivolous. But I'm astonished the market fell. When I was the CFO, we were growing 100%. And we went and told the market will grow 30%, stock fell 40% next day. So it's a good company. We didn't spend money on hotels. We did all the bad things, cleaning our own toilet, all the things. Actually did it just to make shareholders better. But does it? Now there is this. How do you realize this value?
So I would think that if you are looking only at the board, that is a mistake. When you talk of corporate governance, it is basically ensuring that we are able to create a culture which spreads across the entire organization.
You have the culture.
That's right. So, therefore, the market possibly has rewarded us much better.
But you're not
than some
talking
of
to the market. Are you communicating adequately? Is communication the problem?
Right.
Is meeting people the problem? Building brand the right way with investors the problem?
We do it much more than what we were doing in the past. But another related point that I would like to make is the point that you made about superstar CEOs and coming up. So initially, while these startups may not have had a solid board and very important people, but I'm quite sure that when they designed the business model and then went on to execute it, some of the right things were done. It's not that, they would have, you go into many a place I have seen, one of the ways to make out is a person sets up a company, and Mr. Damodaran used to give that example in some of his, how big an office he has set up and how luxurious his office is.
No, I don't want the premium to depend only on Mr. Damodaran.
No. So the point is,
that's what we're coming.
The point that I'm making is the culture of the organization, which is built over a long period of time, that is very important. So everyone has to get involved. Suppose we have a very strong board in SBI, and then down the line, if we are not able to tell our people to do the right things, and the decisions that are taken somehow, in spite of what is being laid down by the board, they are looking at cutting corners, then things will fall apart. Or if we are now having difficulty in, say, managing stressed assets, whether we are doing the right things when we get those across, I think that is very important. And it will apply in, ours is a very large organization, but even in small organizations, it will apply in very good measure. So it has to be all the people involved, the whole-time directors, the CEO, the other executive managing directors, the next rung of leadership who are more important because we are the ones who will be taking the decisions and conveying. But getting them implemented and executed at the branches, at the offices, there can be hundreds of ways I can tell you of how not to do things, even if it is set up. So this culture, if it spreads around, that you have to take risk, you have to do business, but then at the same time, you have to do it in a risk-mitigated manner as per the corporate governance and transparency principles which have been set out. It's a very difficult task. It's not easy. If this is got right, then I think every company would be a 1 trillion
corporate governance
company.
ensures longevity and sustainability.
Not just corporate governance. That is the point.
I'm saying many things, but corporate governance too.
But in the absence of a good corporate governance, which, as I said, does not only include the board, but it is the entire culture of the company, the chances that whatever good business model that you have will, over a period of time, will fall apart, that is correct. And I fully agree with that. But whether we can measure and necessarily there is a premium in each case, I would not really know.
Okay, before we go to the Q&A, I think quickly, what is the conclusion of this? How would you state your views on this topic now, before you have a Q&A?
Yeah, very briefly, I'd say, my biggest concern, Mohan, is that this corporate governance has become a mantra. It's a chant that is heard in every boardroom. And the worry I have is it seen as, is it a rhetorical sort of flourish, lacking conviction? Or is it something that is embedded in the core values of the company? I still believe, I'm sorry to say this, that the incentive structure of our capitalist society, of our economy, and you have very, very well, I think, and very legitimately, justifiably sort of try to compel us to think along those lines. But that incentive structure demands almost that management focus on the short term, and that corporate governance become, well, I wouldn't say just a rhetorical flourish, but it is less of significance to them than meeting the immediate targets that have been set by the board. So in order to change that, I use the example of Gilgamesh, I'm saying we need countervailing forces.
Okay.
Yes, I would agree to that. And I think the market, there is only one angst that we have is, as he was talking about, quarterly results continue to remain very important. And we can say for ourselves, in spite of the fact that the management of State Bank of India has taken so much steps, at least from the beginning of this financial year, to explain how our balance sheet is being strengthened. We have, I think, opened up, reached out. We are talking of communication. And it was also very clearly explained that if you were to make the mistake of reading into our quarterly results, it would not be the right way to do, but look at it over a time span of 1 year and things like that. Unfortunately, to the extent that we would have wanted, it has not responded. In the sense that when they have thought in the short run that there is some problems that are coming up, immediately they tend to react. But I suppose that is the way of the market. But in the long run, yes, I think there is no doubt that there has to be excellent governance, excellent management, and it is just not confined to the board. To my mind, it has to spread as a culture across the organization.
Okay. Now let me say my views, whether I've been provoking you. I think there is a premium for governance because it reduces risk to me and is tangible. You can experience that. Second, it motivates employees to be more productive and feel good about themselves and improve customer service. I think that's outstanding. And third, it creates sustainability and longevity, which is important for business because mortality in business has become higher. And then it creates a bond with customers because customers want to work with good people whom they think to be good. And then it helps in hiring because society respects you.
Absolutely.
If you have good governance, if you have people whom others respect on the board and they see you through that, when you go tell people, marriage becomes easier and the people come and join you, they treat you with respect. Government treats you with respect. Government treats you with good respect, I found it. And then I do think that it also fosters a little bit of innovation because good governance is about free thinking. It's not about suppressing. It's not about pushing things down. It's about free thinking. But you have to have a business model, no compromise. You have to grow fast, no compromise. You have to make those profits, no compromise. And you have to make sure that you compete aggressively and try to make obscene amounts of money. Of course, give the 2% to everybody because, But if you make 1,000, you give 20, it's okay. You make 100 and you try to give 2, it's a little bit less because the poor people who put money into a company, they deserve the best. That's my view. Any questions, folks?
I just want to make an observation that the whole concept of value creation is undergoing a change. So when we talk of premium here, whether this value is being created by companies only for shareholders or stakeholders. So that's one important thing, because the very fact that the discussion was focused only on the premium, which means in monetary terms. So therefore, in larger society, when 197 CEOs in US in August redefined the purpose of the business, that means the whole world, as Mr. Birla and Mr. Damodaran alluded to, is moving from shareholder primacy to stakeholder primacy. So that's one observation. The second one is, I think one has to be extremely careful to separate high and mighty companies of the world. And the governance issues there are very, very different than the rest of them. So we cannot broad brush these things. So the Apples and Amazons of the world and the Facebooks of the world, there the governance issues are very different, very common. We have similar companies in India, and therefore we have to look at this issue separately.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, sir? Yes, sir.
When an investor is investing in a PSU, he comes clearly with an understanding is the government is also going to use this PSU to further its social obligations to the company.
You should be happy.
Yeah, so all I'm saying is it comes with that caveat. And when it comes with that caveat, it automatically is structured in the valuation. If I'm going to invest in Air India...
And you give a low valuation.
No, to that extent, I know it is going to be used as a vehicle for social obligation. So if I'm going to invest in Air India, which is now being privatized...
But where is your commitment to governance?
Are you saying we just cannot do a trade-off between governance and profit?
Okay.
And second point, which I just wanted, since we are come from an automotive company, just wanted to say there is no trade-off between governance. The way you rightly said, we have to move fast. Governance actually, if you take an example of a vehicle, governance actually plays the role of a brake. You can speed up fast because you know the brake is there. It can be put to use and it can be in time. Without the brake, you just can't speed. But at the same time, if you press the brake too often, you're just going to generate heat and not speed.
Okay.
But last point, it's better to have your foot on the brake than a foot in the mouth. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Sir, in the recent past.
Yeah, please stand up. They want your photograph. I mean, they want your video.
In the recent past, we have seen the fall of important corporates like Jet Airways or Eligare, or institutions like ILNFS, DHFL, and recent PMC Bank and all that.
Important.
Prominent.
Prominent.
And in all these cases, one common factor which is
Was
found
governance.
is that is the related party to elections,
And governance.
which is related to the governance. Now, there are laws, the regulations to take care of these related party to elections. But at the end of the day, we find that laws, regulations are not able to take care of
Okay.
all that issue.
Okay.
My question is
Okay.
that looking
Okay.
at the governance issue, can this panel suggest something more than what the laws and regulations
Okay.
are not
Okay.
providing?
Okay. A quick question to Vikram and Arijit. Vikram, would you say that bad corporate governance inevitably leads to discount and failure?
Yes.
Arijit?
I would agree.
You would agree.
because-
On that, we are all unanimous. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Yes, Rono.
So the question being posed is there a premium for good corporate governance? When shareholders are buying shares in your company, and they're not just looking at current profitability, they're looking at what is the expected profitability 4 years from now. And the biggest question in their mind is, how do you make decisions in this company? And corporate governance is a belief that if you have debate and discussion, it relates to better decisions.
So you agree with the proposal?
Sorry?
You agree there is a premium?
And I just want to expand on that. And you shouldn't just stop at the board, as was suggested. The question is also, how are decisions made in the management group too? And I think all of us have this belief that open, healthy discussion in the management team and at the board level results in better better
Okay.
decision making and therefore higher profitability.
Okay.
So the two are not in conflict in any way in my
Okay.
mind.
Okay, good. Any lady members? No, now ladies. But one more, Sandy. Ladies now. Now, you know, we should not suppress people. Yes, any ladies, please? No, it's not. The gender domination is required. Anybody? Any ladies? Yes, madam.
No shortcuts to good corporate governance. There's no way stakeholders or shareholders are going to appreciate in long term.
Long term.
Long term.
Long
You know,
term.
they may just see some profits, get excited, but they will see through whether this particular company has good corporate governance. And if the management is good there, then entire company, all the other lower level managers will get it.
Okay.
The top is not in line, nothing can help.
If everybody has got good governance, where is the premium? The premium is only against people who don't have bad governance,
No.
who are going to die anyway.
Unless you put in your company into a stage where you're innovative and move on with times. Otherwise, company is no use. It's just a name.
So it is an input with
Yes.
additional things.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, Sandy. I'll come to you.
A basic question.
Yes, sir.
Why this premium is always looked at as a shareholder value or market cap? Premium is a much larger term. A governance premium is studied in a way that it has got various facets of running a business. It can't be just focused on a narrow thing called market cap or value. Value is not just market cap. I just might be, my question to you is that why are we focusing
Yeah.
on shareholder value?
I agree with you up to a point, but ultimately, unless it is related to a certain commercial output, whether it is market cap or profitability, the very sustenance or existence of the company could be at stake. So, up to a point, yes, like people spoke nicely about State Bank, that we have a social objective which should be recognized, and so do we feel like that. But having said that, unless we have shareholders outside of the government, they have invested in the bank expecting a certain return, and we certainly have a commitment to them to be able to deliver that value. And unless that is realized, it will be very difficult for us to even raise capital in the future. So,
Vikram?
No, I agree with with the question. I mean, I would say that, of course, we need a monetary or a sort of quantitative sort of number to try and establish a premium. But
you dismiss it so easily?
But no, I don't dismiss it because I
mean, are you against profits?
No, I'm not against. I'm worried about this being hostage to data or to numbers. I think profits are important, and I said it in the very beginning. If you don't make profits, you can't afford. I said it clearly. You can't afford all this conversation, okay? But if you, of course, ignore corporate governance or good governance, you don't deserve the profits. If you ignore principles, you don't deserve the profits. So I've made it very clear. But my point here is that value is a somewhat of amorphous term. It should not be just limited to just a number. One of the great value generating sort of initiatives or you might say examples of good corporate governance is how does a company manage issues like succession plan? How do they manage their strategy? How do they manage executive compensation? These are very concrete. And I'm saying that if you just leave it in the hands of one of those four entities that I have now just, you might actually undermine the perception of corporate governance. I'm not saying that all four entities that I should get involved, but certainly the board maybe needs to be involved with the management on issues like succession plan, like issues like executive compensation or on strategy. There has to be a balance, and that's where I am coming from all the time. Let's look, and that's why I said reconciling this conundrum. Reconcile it by creating a balance where you're searching to collaborate, where you are resolving the natural tendency to compete and to clash.
Okay. Mr. Damodaran? Yes, after Sarayu, you should ask us the question because you framed the topic. Yes. What about, yeah, please. Yes.
We somehow only we're talking about market cap, so are we really only talking about listed companies?
That's what he asked.
And, to me, it's about all companies, all institutions. This has nothing to do only with shareholder value. And I really want to take on, we spoke a lot around boards, independent directors, etc. There are many, many institutions across the world that are unlisted. They may not even be in the corporate framework because we spoke about corporate Inc. Are we saying it's not relevant for them?
It's relevant for them too.
And therefore, I want I want to understand why do we always come back only to market cap?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, we talk about multilateral institutions. And sometimes there's a lot to be asked about how they function and how capital is allocated there. So my question is, isn't that a very material input into capital allocation, moving away from market cap only?
So you're saying that corporate governance is required for all institutions?
Absolutely.
Across the board, across the world, wherever you are?
Absolutely. And I want to say, shouldn't it be a material input into capital allocation?
Yeah, it should be. I mean, on that we agree, right?
We all agree.
Yeah,
yes.
we agree that it should be there across the board. It should not be only focused on market cap across the board. But then when you go one step up and look at markets where the valuation determines, because the society speaks to you differently in terms of value, is an issue. Yes, okay. You're going to ask a question. Yeah?
I think most of us sitting on this side, maybe independent directors on a couple of boards, where do you really draw a line between orderly growth or growth at any cost? But when you talk of a valuation, premium and all that, I think where the things have gone wrong in the corporate world is growth at any cost. But nobody has understood where to draw the line between orderly growth and the growth at any cost. Any thought on that?
Any thought? Vikram and Arijit?
Again, sorry, I don't want to duck these questions where we are asking for a kind of quantitative response. But I will say that's a very, very important question. At what cost? Growth. But when we ask that question, we then actually go into somewhat into a very difficult area because we talked. I mean, Mr. Birla was talking about climate change and carbon, and the demands on companies to be carbon friendly, or environmentally friendly. I'd say, okay, that's the cost. You grow, and if you're then despoiling the environment, it's a cost to society, it's an externality you should take into account in your growth. Someone else may say, you might say, no, that's an externality.
No, I agree with you.
No, I know, I'm not saying you will, but suppose someone did say. So at what cost? And that word cost has to be very carefully understood.
Okay, yeah, please.
Yeah, but just growth at any cost, and I just looked at it in the normal sense, would imply that, at any cost here would imply that I'm willing to do anything and override any good principles. That by the very nature of that sentence is unacceptable. So if you have good corporate governance, you cannot have growth at any cost. It has to be growth which is genuine and sustainable.
Okay, folks, give them a round of applause. We had a great panel, great discussion. Thank you very much.